The town of Ebisugaoka sits quiet in the 1960s, wrapped in mountain fog thick enough to swallow sound. Hinako Shimizu stands on a bench where her best friend Shu just handed her a small box filled with red pills. She takes them regularly now. The headaches have become unbearable, pulsing reminders of everything wrong in her life, her father's voice still echoing with those words that cut deeper than any blade. Why can't you be more like your sister Junko? But these pills do something the over-the-counter medicine never could. They blur the edges of reality just enough to make the arranged marriage ahead of her feel less like a cage and more like a dream she might survive. Except the dreams aren't hers anymore. And somewhere in the space between what's real and what the pills show her, a man in a fox mask is waiting, calling himself her husband, preparing rituals that will either save her or destroy everything she's ever been. Silent Hill F takes you into Hinako's fracturing mind across 5 different endings, each one peeling back another layer of what really happened during those days when the fog came and her friends started dying, and the line between Hinako, who wants to live her own life, and the Hinako being molded into a bride dissolved completely. Tonight we're walking through every ending, explaining what each one means for the story, why they contradict and complement each other, and what Silent Hill is really asking about identity, autonomy, and the terror of losing yourself to traditions you never chose. If you find something in this video that connects with you, please drop a comment letting me know. Whether it was a specific detail about character psychology, a connection you made to the folklore behind the Fox wedding, or just a moment that stayed with you after everything else faded. You can also suggest a topic for a future deep dive. Building this community means we're all exploring these dark corners together, finding meaning in horror that most people dismiss as just scary video games. So get comfortable, turn the lights down low, and let's begin. Silent Hill F operates on a principle that defines the entire franchise. What you see isn't objective truth, but subjective horror. Reality filtered through trauma and shaped by guilt until the town itself becomes a mirror showing you what you can't face about yourself. Hinako's story fractures into 5 distinct endings because there are 5 different ways her identity could resolve, or fail to resolve, under the pressure of an arranged marriage she doesn't want, family abuse she can't escape, and friendships that might be her salvation or might be part of the system destroying her. Chapter 1. The Foundation. What happened before the endings diverge? Before we can understand where the endings split, we need to understand the single thread they all emerge from. 1960, Japan carries weight that modern audiences might not immediately register. The war ended 15 years ago, but its aftermath shapes everything. Ebisugaoka is a mountain town where traditional values haven't just survived, they've calcified into something rigid and unforgiving. Arranged marriages are common enough to be unremarkable. Fathers hold absolute authority. Women who resist are labeled difficult, disrespectful, or worse. Hinako Shimizu lives in this pressure cooker of tradition and expectation, with a father who uses violence to maintain control, and a mother who sides with him even when he's hurting their daughter. The psychological term for what Hinako experiences is complex developmental trauma. She's not dealing with a single traumatic incident, but with an entire childhood structured around unpredictability, criticism, and the constant message that she's inadequate compared to her sister Junko. This creates specific psychological vulnerabilities that Silent Hill F will exploit with surgical precision. The headaches Hinako suffers are psychosomatic manifestations of this stress. Her body is keeping score of trauma her conscious mind can't fully process. When standard medicine fails, Shu provides those small red pills, described in documents found throughout the game as traditional Chinese medicine using kudzu root and peony, but the effects go beyond herbal remedies. The pills create mild dissociation, a psychological state where the boundaries between self and world become permeable, where reality feels slightly distant, where the overwhelming pressure of her situation becomes manageable because she's not fully present in her own experience. This dissociation is crucial. It's both her survival mechanism and her vulnerability. The pills allow Hinako to function despite unbearable circumstances, but they also make her suggestible, make it harder to distinguish memory from dream, make it possible for her to experience two contradictory realities simultaneously without immediately recognizing the contradiction. She's living in the real world of Ebisugaoka, where an arranged marriage is being finalized, and she's living in a dreamlike world where a fox-masked man named Kotoyuki is guiding her through wedding rituals that feel both inevitable and impossible. The arranged marriage itself is the central trauma event. In 1960 Japan, the practice called omiai kon involves families arranging matches for their children, often prioritizing social and economic considerations over the children's preferences. Hinako has been promised to Kotoyuki, a man she barely knows but who appears in her medicated dreams as her protector, her companion, someone who might offer escape from her father's house, even if that escape means surrendering her identity to a new household with its own demands and expectations. Shu represents an alternative that Hinako can't quite articulate. Their relationship exists in ambiguous space between deep friendship and suppressed romance. Shu's repeated phrase, "I'll always be there for you," carries weight beyond simple support. He's offering constancy in a life defined by instability, loyalty when everyone else has conditions on their affection. But Shu can't offer what the arranged marriage provides: legitimacy, social acceptance, a defined role in adult society. His love, if that's what it is, exists outside the structures that govern Hinako's world. Choosing him would mean rejecting not just the marriage, but the entire social framework that makes her life intelligible to the community around her. Then there's the other relationship that complicates everything: Sakuko. The game presents her as autistic, struggling with social connections and changes to routine. Sakuko attached herself to Hinako with an intensity that feels suffocating. She made Hinako promise things: "We'll get boyfriends together. We'll get married at the same time. We'll never leave each other." These weren't casual childhood declarations, but Sakuko's attempt to create certainty in a world she found overwhelming and unpredictable. When rumors spread that Hinako and Shu might be together, Sakuko felt betrayed. When the arranged marriage was announced, that betrayal intensified into something consuming. Sakuko starts calling Hinako a traitor, not from malice, but from genuine psychological pain at the perceived abandonment. Rinko adds another dimension. She's jealous of Hinako's closeness with Shu, burns with resentment that gets expressed through small cruelties and passive aggression. Where Sakuko's hurt is open and raw, Rinko's is buried under layers of politeness that occasionally crack to reveal genuine hostility. These three friends represent three different forms of social pressure: Sakuko demanding Hinako stay the same, Rinko resenting what Hinako has, Shu offering alternative that society won't recognize as legitimate. The dreamlike world Hinako experiences while on the medication literalizes her psychological conflict. It's structured as a traditional Shinto wedding, each trial or encounter representing a specific ritual step toward becoming a married woman. The fox-masked man guiding her is both Kotoyuki, her actual arranged marriage partner, and something more: a yokai figure from Japanese folklore, specifically connected to the Kitsune no Yomeiri, or fox wedding, a phenomenon where rain falls while the sun shines, interpreted in folklore as foxes holding their wedding procession. This folkloric element transforms Hinako's arranged marriage from purely social obligation into something carrying mythological weight. The fox wedding exists in liminal space between human and supernatural, between chosen and compelled, between blessing and curse. Kotoyuki in the dream world offers Hinako tenderness her waking life lacks. He's patient, protective, committed to building a future with her rather than simply demanding her service, but he's also guiding her through rituals that will transform her identity, that will take Shimizu Hinako and create someone new whose name and self belong to his family line rather than her birth family. The game's structure alternates between the dreamlike wedding ritual world and the reality of Ebisugaoka. In the dream world, Hinako moves through spaces that represent stages of marriage preparation. She's given a kaiken, a ceremonial dagger traditionally hidden in a bride's kimono as symbol of protection and resolve to defend her chastity and family. She undergoes purification rituals conducted by a priestess who looks like Sakuko. She exchanges sake cups with Kotoyuki in the Sansan Kudo ceremony. She receives markings on her body representing her new identity as married woman. Each ritual brings her closer to a transformation she both desires and fears. In the real world, Hinako navigates Ebisugaoka's fog-shrouded streets, encountering her friends in states of psychological distress. Sakuko appears trapped in darkness, terrified and accusatory. Rinko manifests with burning intensity, her jealousy becoming literally consuming. Shu oscillates between supportive and desperate, torn between wanting Hinako's happiness and wanting her to stay with him. These encounters blur the line between memory and hallucination, between actual conversations and Hinako's guilt-fueled projections of how her friends see her. The Shiromuku becomes the game's central monster. It's a figure wearing the traditional all-white bridal kimono called Shiromuku, which symbolizes the bride being willing to be dyed by her husband's colors. The Shiromuku stalks Hinako through both dream and reality, representing the married self that's trying to consume or replace her current self. It's not an external threat, but an internal one made manifest. The version of Hinako that accepts the marriage pursuing the version that resists it. This is where the pill's effects become crucial again. The dissociation they induce allows these two versions of Hinako to exist simultaneously and perceive each other as separate entities. There's the Hinako who's already psychologically committed to the marriage, who's walking through the rituals, who sees Kotoyuki as her salvation. And there's the Hinako who's resisting, who wants to reclaim her birth name Shimizu Hinako rather than take her husband's family name, who sees the marriage as the death of her authentic self. The game makes you play the resisting Hinako while being hunted by the accepting Hinako, creating psychological horror from the experience of being at war with yourself. The pills also explain the memory inconsistencies and temporal confusion. Hinako can't reliably remember, did certain conversations occur, or were they imagined? Are her friends actually dead or just absent? Has the marriage already happened, or is it still approaching? The pharmaceutical dissociation combined with trauma-induced dissociation creates a state where Hinako's grip on linear time and objective truth has dissolved completely. She's experiencing multiple potential realities simultaneously, and the endings represent different ways these realities might resolve. One more crucial detail shapes everything. Junko, the sister Hinako was always unfavorably compared to, isn't the villain Hinako initially perceives. Throughout the game, Junko tries to reach Hinako, tries to offer her choices, tries to give her agency in a situation where everyone else is pushing her toward decisions they've already made. But Hinako, trained by years of being told, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" interprets Junko's interventions as judgment rather than support. This misreading becomes critical in several endings. The red pills, the arranged marriage, the psychological pressure, the dreamlike wedding world, the Shiramuku hunting her friends manifesting as obstacles or helpers, and her own identity splitting under pressure. This is the foundation. Every ending diverges from this common root, taking these elements and resolving them in different configurations. Some endings suggest Hinako escapes. Some suggest she accepts her fate. Some suggest far darker outcomes where escape and acceptance both fail, and she's left with nothing but the fog and the ruins of relationships she couldn't save. The genius of Silent Hill F's narrative structure is that it refuses to tell you which ending is true. In traditional storytelling, multiple endings exist on a hierarchy, with one canonical ending representing what really happened. Silent Hill F rejects this. All 5 endings are true simultaneously. They're different facets of the same psychological collapse, different ways of interpreting the same ambiguous evidence, different answers to the question what happened to Hinako, depending on which lens you're viewing through. Now that we understand what all the endings share, we can examine how they diverge. We'll start with the ending most players encounter first, the one that establishes the baseline horror before subsequent playthroughs reveal additional layers. Chapter 2, the normal ending, when reality shatters completely. The normal ending is where most players' first journey concludes. It's called normal not because it's pleasant or represents the most likely outcome, but because it's the default endpoint when you've completed the game without fulfilling the specific conditions that unlock other endings. This ending establishes the core horror of Hinako's situation while leaving crucial questions unresolved, setting up the need for subsequent playthroughs to find answers the normal ending deliberately withholds. Hinako from the real world awakens in the dreamlike wedding space. This is the first time both versions of her exist simultaneously in the same location. She's heavily drugged, moving with the lifeless quality of someone who's surrendered to circumstances they can't control. The red pills have done their work. She's compliant now, docile, ready to go through with the ceremony, even though some part of her is screaming. She walks into a shrine where Junko stands waiting. Here's where the player's choices throughout the game determine the specific dialogue, but the core confrontation remains. Junko asking Hinako if she's certain about this path, telling her she still has choices, trying to penetrate the pharmaceutical haze and reach whatever remains of her sister's agency. But Hinako, trained by years of their father's abuse to interpret anything Junko says as criticism, lashes out. How could you be on her side? She accuses. You don't understand how I feel. This is tragic misreading. Junko isn't on their father's side. She's trying to give Hinako an exit before it's too late. But the normal ending is partially defined by Hinako's inability to recognize help when it's offered. She's so convinced everyone has abandoned her that she pushes away the one person genuinely trying to support her autonomy. Hinako takes more red pills. This is crucial. She's self-medicating to get through the ceremony, using dissociation as anesthesia against the psychological pain of surrendering her identity. The pills allow her to keep moving forward when her authentic self would collapse. Their chemical betrayal of her own resistance, her body's survival instinct overriding her desire to escape because escape seems impossible. Then she approaches the altar, the focal point of the entire wedding ritual. The altar represents the transformation point where Shimizu Hinako will cease to exist and a new identity, defined by her husband's family, will be created. It's death and birth simultaneously. Standing before it, Hinako experiences a moment of clarity, cutting through the pharmaceutical fog. This altar, she says, this is what caused all of this. And she destroys it. The symbolism is powerful. Hinako is rejecting the marriage at its culminating moment. She's refusing the transformation. She's claiming the right to remain Shimizu Hinako instead of becoming her husband's possession. It's an act of rebellion that feels heroic in the moment, feels like reclaiming agency, but Silent Hill F isn't interested in simple triumph. The destruction of the altar doesn't solve anything, it just makes the horror explicit. The moment Hinako smashes the altar, her other self appears. The Shiromuku, the bride version of Hinako wearing the white wedding kimono, stands before her. She got the better of this version of herself, the game says. The accepting Hinako has manifested fully, and she's not pleased. The two versions stare at each other, and then something shifts. The dreamlike wedding world begins to dissolve, and Hinako finds herself in a different space, one that's structured like reality but infected with nightmare imagery. She hears voices. They're coming from all around her. Voices of wedding guests asking what the hell is she doing, asking if she's insane, telling her to stop. These are the attendees at her actual wedding ceremony. People gathered to witness her marriage to Kotoyuki, watching as Hinako has some kind of psychotic break and starts destroying the altar while screaming about being chased by herself. The normal ending's horror comes from its revelation that what we've been experiencing as supernatural horror might be psychiatric crisis. Hinako isn't being hunted by a ghost bride in a Silent Hill otherworld. She's dissociating at her own wedding, her mind fragmenting under pressure she couldn't withstand, her grip on reality dissolving so completely that she's experiencing full psychotic break with visual and auditory hallucinations. The voices include Kotoyuki, the fox-masked man, now just a regular man in groom's attire, asking why are you doing this, sounding hurt and confused rather than monstrous. He showed he cared, the game suggests. He was there for her when she needed it. But in Hinako's fractured mind, he's become something threatening, part of the system trying to erase her. Hinako runs. She bolts from the ceremony, out of the shrine or wedding hall, into streets that, in her perception, are filled with monsters, but which are actually filled with people, guests and family members trying to stop her, trying to bring her back, trying to understand what's happening to this young woman who seemed fine moments ago and has now descended into complete psychological collapse. And then the ending's darkest revelation. Hinako sees these people as monsters. The red sirens that characterize Silent Hill's otherworld transitions aren't supernatural. They're Hinako's dissociative perception, transforming ordinary humans into threats. And she defends herself. She kills them. The police radio transmissions that play over the ending sequence confirm this horror. Units reporting to the scene describe a wedding massacre. Multiple victims dead. The suspect is a young woman in her 20s wearing a wedding dress. Height approximately 160 centimeters. Armed with a knife. Highly dangerous. Exercise extreme caution. The suspect is Hinako. The victims are wedding guests, family members, possibly Kotoyuki himself. The knife is the kaiken that was given to her during the dream wedding rituals, the ceremonial dagger that was supposed to symbolize her protection and resolve. She's used it to slaughter people she perceived as monsters, but who were actually human beings trying to help her or simply attending a wedding. The police reports mention the red and white capsules found at the scene. Hinako dropped pills while fleeing, the same pills Shu had been giving her, the same pills that created the dissociative state that allowed her to experience two realities simultaneously, the same pills that, in toxic dose or in someone with specific psychological vulnerabilities, might cause hallucinations severe enough to make her incapable of distinguishing humans from monsters. The normal ending concludes with the implication that Hinako is, on the run, actively being hunted by law enforcement, having committed multiple homicides during a psychotic episode triggered by the pharmaceutical dissociation combined with the unbearable pressure of the arranged marriage. She's not a victim who escaped. She's a perpetrator who's destroyed lives, including potentially her own. This ending refuses catharsis. There's no moment of triumph, no sense that Hinako's rejection of the marriage was justified or successful. Instead, her resistance led directly to catastrophic violence. Her attempt to reclaim her identity resulted in her becoming someone unrecognizable, a killer fleeing from police, a young woman whose life is functionally over, whether she's captured or not. The ambiguity that defines the normal ending matters. Did Hinako actually kill real people, or is even this police radio broadcast part of her hallucination? The game doesn't definitively answer. You can interpret it either way. What's certain is that Hinako experienced what she perceived as self-defense against monstrous threats in a nightmare reality, and there are consequences, either legal consequences if the murders were real, or complete psychotic break requiring institutionalization if they weren't. The red pills emerge as neither salvation nor simple villainy. They were Shu's attempt to help Hinako manage the psychological pain of her situation. They worked, in a sense, allowing her to continue functioning when untreated anxiety and trauma might have paralyzed her. But they also enabled the catastrophic dissociation that led to the massacre. This is the tragedy of self-medication in the absence of proper psychiatric care. The things that make unbearable situations manageable can also make you vulnerable to complete psychological collapse. The normal ending also establishes the pattern that defines Silent Hill. Hinako's friends and family manifest in her subjective reality in ways that reflect both their actual relationships and her guilt-distorted perception of those relationships. Sakuko appears as accusing betrayer. Rinko appears as jealous rival. Shu appears as desperate savior. Kotoyuki appears as fox-masked husband deity. None of these manifestations are purely objective or purely hallucinated. They're Hinako's traumatized mind processing actual relationship dynamics through the distorting lens of dissociation and pharmaceutical alteration. By ending here, the normal ending asks players to sit with profound discomfort. Did we just play through a game about a young woman having a psychotic break at her wedding and killing people? Is Silent Hill supernatural or psychiatric? Is Hinako victim or perpetrator? The game refuses to resolve these tensions, instead leaving players with the knowledge that Hinako's attempt to escape an arranged marriage through destroying the altar led directly to the worst possible outcome. But the normal ending isn't the complete picture. It's one facet. To understand what Silent Hill F is really doing, we need to see how the other endings reshape these same elements, how they offer different answers to the question, what happened to Hinako, and how they collectively paint a portrait of identity dissolution that's more complex than any single ending can contain. Chapter 3. The Bad Ending, When Acceptance Becomes Horror. The bad ending earns its designation not because it's poorly executed, but because it represents the outcome where Hinako's resistance fails completely, and she's subsumed by the identity the arranged marriage was creating. If the normal ending showed her fleeing into disaster, the bad ending shows her staying, and discovering that staying is its own form of disaster. This ending begins the same way. Hinako walking into the shrine altar, drugged and compliant. Junko is waiting with the same attempt to reach her sister, but in this ending path, the player has made choices throughout the game that indicate deeper psychological surrender. Maybe Hinako has spent more time in the dreamlike wedding world accepting Kotoyuki's guidance. Maybe she's killed fewer of the manifestations of her resisting self. The game tracks these decisions not through explicit choice prompts, but through behavior patterns. And the bad ending triggers when those patterns suggest someone who's already internalized her defeat. Junko confronts Hinako more forcefully here. She tells Hinako it's time to accept her fate. The more she clings to life as Shimizu Hinako, the more she tries to hold on to her past identity, the more she suffers. Shimizu Hinako no longer exists, Junko says, referring to how marriage will transfer her to her husband's family registry and give her a new family name. It's not cruelty, but attempt at realism. The marriage is happening regardless of Hinako's resistance, so clinging to the doomed identity only extends her pain. But the doll appears. This recurring motif throughout Silent Hill F represents Hinako's childhood self before the arranged marriage became inevitable, the version of her that still remembers what it felt like to have dreams and preferences and a future she controlled. The doll removes Junko from the scene, intervening to prevent Hinako's final surrender. Hinako destroys the altar again. "I will bring back Shimizu Hinako," she declares. This is assertion of continued existence, refusal to let the marriage erase her. It feels like triumph again, like maybe in this ending she'll escape. But then the symptoms begin. Hinako experiences a splitting headache so severe it drops her to her knees. The other version of herself appears, the bride Hinako in her wedding kimono, and they confront each other directly. "You took everything from me," one says. The accusation is mutual. Both versions believe the other has stolen her life, her identity, her future. They're locked in zero-sum battle, where only one can survive because there isn't enough psychological space for both identities to coexist. But then the bride Hinako says something crucial. It's not like you can't see them anymore. They can still visit. You can still visit your friends and family after marriage. This is attempt at compromise. Suggestion that identity transformation doesn't require complete erasure. That Hinako can be married and still maintain connections to her previous life. It's the moderate position, the practical solution that adults often propose to young people facing major transitions. Hinako rejects it. She doesn't even listen. She wants herself back, wants everything she's feeling right now, is ready to face it all rather than surrendering to medication and compliance. This could be read as courageous, as choosing authentic suffering over comfortable numbness. But Silent Hill F isn't interested in valorizing resistance for its own sake. The question the game asks is, what happens when you're right to resist, but lack the power to make your resistance successful? The two versions of Hinako charge at each other. They're going to resolve this physically, one destroying the other. But then the bride Hinako transforms. She becomes demonic, possessed-looking, walking with supernatural menace that makes her no longer human but something threatening. Kotoyuki intervenes, giving Hinako an elixir to drink. "Unbelievable," he says. "You're possessed by something so foul and resisted for so long." The framing here is crucial. From Kotoyuki's perspective, the resisting Hinako is the possessed one. She's contaminated by her refusal to accept her proper role, infected by whatever force makes women resist marriage and tradition, and the social structures that give life meaning and order. Her resistance isn't healthy autonomy, but spiritual illness. The elixir is meant to purify her, to drive out the foul possession, to return her to the compliance that represents health from traditionalist perspective. Kotoyuki extinguishes the possessed spirit, performing what amounts to spiritual violence against the part of Hinako that was fighting for her autonomy. He's trying to help from his framework. He's saving his bride from possession, protecting her from the force threatening to prevent their marriage. But from Hinako's interior experience, he's killing her authentic self, destroying the part of her that wanted to choose her own life. Then Shu arrives. He crashes into the scene and attacks Kotoyuki, hitting him and trying to follow up with another strike. This is the confrontation that's been building throughout the game. Shu, who loves Hinako in ways he could never articulate, against Kotoyuki, who has legitimate cultural and familial claim to marry her. And all of it comes spilling out. "Why are you protecting him?" Shu demands. "I swore I'd keep you safe. Don't you trust me? It's always been the two of us. I wanted for us to be together like we always were." The desperation in his words is clear. Shu has been Hinako's constant companion, probably since childhood, definitely through her teenage years, when her father's abuse was worst. They've been each other's support system in a world that offered them little support. And now Hinako is being taken from him through an arranged marriage to someone Shu perceives as a stranger who doesn't know her. But Hinako explains the impossible position she's in. "We can't stay the same forever," she tells Shu. "You want things to stay as they are. But Kotoyuki, he says he wants to build a future together with me. Both ideas scare me, but both of them fill me with hope." This is the clearest articulation of Hinako's dilemma in any ending. Shu offers constancy but no socially recognized path forward. Their relationship exists in eternal adolescence, beautiful and safe but ultimately static. Kotoyuki offers transformation and forward movement into adult identity, but at the cost of surrendering control over who she becomes. Then Hinako says something that reveals just how deeply the psychological splitting has damaged her. "If only I could split myself in two. If there were two of me, then one could stay here with you and keep being your partner, and I could pursue Kotoyuki." She's articulating the dissociative fantasy that the red pills and psychological pressure have created, that she could be multiple people simultaneously, each living a different version of her life, no part of her having to make the unbearable choice between the people and futures she cares about. But you can't split yourself. The human psyche tries through dissociative identity disorder, through compartmentalization, through the kind of pharmaceutical dissociation Hinako has been experiencing. But ultimately, these are coping mechanisms that create dysfunction rather than actual solutions. Hinako's fantasy of splitting in two represents her inability to integrate her contradictory desires and obligations into a coherent adult identity. Shu realizes he's lost. He drops his weapon and runs. Kotoyuki wakes and says he'll pursue him, that he can't allow Shu's interference to pass. He's going to find Shu and probably harm him, enforce his claim to Hinako by eliminating the rival. Hinako runs after Shu and catches him before Kotoyuki does. What follows is Shu's confession. He admits he gave Hinako the capsules, the red pills that have been enabling her dissociation. He explains they help you reflect within yourself. They allow introspection and self-examination, but they can be extremely dangerous too. He wanted her to accept the marriage. He cared about her so much that he wanted her to see that the marriage could be positive, could be her path to happiness. "What's wrong with me?" Shu asks. "How can I not be happy for my partner? I'm such a piece of trash." This confession reframes everything. Shu wasn't just helping Hinako manage anxiety. He was drugging her to make her more compliant with an outcome he intellectually believed was best for her, even though emotionally he wanted her to stay with him. The pills were his attempt to reconcile these contradictions, to help her accept what he couldn't prevent. It's betrayal, but betrayal motivated by genuine care, twisted by impossible circumstances. Hinako forgives him immediately. "I could never hate you," she says. "He's my partner. We've been together ever since I can remember. How could I hate him?" This forgiveness is crucial. In Hinako's mind, Shu remains her primary attachment figure despite his manipulation. She can't afford to be angry at him, because losing him would mean losing her last connection to her previous identity. But then something changes. Hinako starts to transform. "You're trying to ruin today," she says, her voice shifting, "to ruin everything that we've had together." A beast emerges from Shu, a supernatural entity that represents all his suppressed feelings given physical form. This monster embodies passion, energy, and aggression in Japanese folklore, often depicted with a fiery or demonic appearance. Shu's face remains visible at the center of the beast, showing that this is still him, just the parts of him he can't express through normal human interaction. The beast fights Hinako, attacking her with the full force of Shu's jealousy, possessiveness, and grief at losing her. Hinako defeats it, leaving Shu standing human again, defeated, stripped of his last defense. Then Kotoyuki arrives, and the two men face each other, both having fought for Hinako in different ways, both having failed to prevent this moment. Kotoyuki extends his hand to Shu, offering friendship. It's a gesture of reconciliation, an attempt to resolve the triangle through alliance rather than continued conflict. Shu initially refuses, but then accepts. They put their fists together in a gesture of truce, and at that moment, the fox wedding occurs. The sun shower, that phenomenon of rain falling while sunlight persists, appears in the sky. It's a good omen for their wedding, the game says. The fox spirits are blessing this union. The three of them stand together, Hinako between her two important men, and Kotoyuki removes his mask. This is the moment of revelation, where the supernatural figure becomes human, where the fox-masked husband shows his actual face. All three walk toward the building where the ceremony will continue. Kotoyuki invites them inside, saying it's cold. Let's go inside. Shu agrees. It seems like resolution, like maybe this ending found a way for Hinako to maintain both relationships, to integrate her past and future into something workable. But then Hinako's panic returns. No, 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 she says, her breath quickening. I'm scared. I'm so scared. Please. The pharmaceutical compliance has worn off enough for her authentic terror to surface. I don't want to be like my mother. I don't want to become my mother. This is the core trauma. Hinako's mother lived in an abusive marriage, sided with Hinako's father even when he was cruel, lost her own identity to the role of wife and mother in a system that granted her no autonomy. Hinako has spent her entire life watching her mother's diminishment, seeing what marriage did to someone who might once have had dreams and preferences and a self. And now Hinako is walking into the same fate. The arranged marriage might be to a kinder man than her father. Kotoyuki hasn't shown overt cruelty, but the structure is the same. Hinako will leave her family registry, join her husband's household, subordinate her identity to her role as wife. She'll become what her mother became. And that realization, piercing through the pharmaceutical fog and the false resolution, is what defines the bad ending. The ending concludes with Hinako's terror unresolved. She's going inside. The ceremony will happen. Her resistance has failed completely. Shu has been neutralized through friendship with Kotoyuki. Junko can't reach her. The doll, representing her childhood self, has been overcome. Shimizu Hinako will die, replaced by her married identity, and she knows it's happening and can't stop it and is walking forward anyway, because all alternatives have been eliminated. This is why it's the bad ending. Hinako survives physically. No one is killed. There's no massacre, no psychotic break, no police chase. But psychologically, she doesn't survive. The person she was will be erased through the marriage, and the person she'll become is something she fears and despises. She's going to spend the rest of her life as a version of herself she actively doesn't want to be, watching her own erasure in slow motion, unable to resist or escape, trapped in the exact fate she fought against. The bad ending also reveals the limitations of Shu's love. He thought he was helping her by providing pills that would make the marriage tolerable. He thought friendship with Kotoyuki was the mature resolution, but he misread what Hinako needed, which wasn't acceptance of her fate but escape from it. His good intentions led to her worst outcome. We're now about a third of the way through the script. Before we continue to the remaining endings, this is the right moment to step back and recognize the pattern Silent Hill F is building. Each ending takes the same fundamental situation and resolves it differently based on which psychological strand you follow to its conclusion. The normal ending followed the strand of psychotic resistance leading to violence. The bad ending followed the strand of defeated resignation leading to identity death. The remaining endings will follow other strands, each equally valid, each equally horrifying in different ways. The question Silent Hill F refuses to answer definitively is which strand is the real one? What actually happened to Hinako in objective terms? Because the game's thesis is that there is no objective truth when you're dealing with dissociative trauma this severe. That Hinako experienced all of these outcomes simultaneously in the fragmented landscape of her dissolving psyche, that every ending is true from the perspective that generated it. That thesis is going to become even more complex as we examine the good ending, where Hinako appears to escape with Shu, and the true ending, where something stranger and more melancholic resolves the contradictions in a way none of the other endings prepare you for. Chapter 4. The Good Ending, When Escape Feels Possible. The good ending begins with hope, which makes it all the more disturbing when you realize what that hope actually costs. This is the ending where Hinako appears to escape the arranged marriage, where she and Shu run away together, where resistance actually succeeds instead of collapsing into violence or psychological surrender. But Silent Hill F never offers simple victories, and the good ending's apparent triumph carries implications that become darker the more closely you examine them. Hinako walks into the shrine altar in the same drugged state as the other endings. Junko waits with the same confrontation. But in this path, something different happens in Hinako's response. The choices players made throughout the game have indicated someone who maintained stronger connections to her past self, who didn't fully surrender to the bride identity, who kept fighting even when fighting seemed futile. The good ending rewards that persistence, but the reward is complicated. Junko tells Hinako that even now, she still can't accept the inevitable. She wants to fight for her life. She has the right to exist as Shimizu Hinako rather than being absorbed into her husband's family identity. But Junko reminds her it's far too late for that. The marriage has already progressed too far. The social mechanisms are in motion. Fighting now will only make everything worse. But then Junko freezes in place. Something has stopped her, interrupted her attempt to convince Hinako to surrender. The doll appears again, that manifestation of Hinako's childhood self, the part of her that remembers what it felt like to have agency and dreams. She's not ready, the doll's presence announces. Hinako isn't finished fighting. Hinako walks to the altar and destroys it. The gesture carries more weight here than in previous endings because it comes with clearer conviction. This isn't panic or psychotic break. This is deliberate rejection of the transformation the marriage represents. I want to go back to being Shimizu Hinako, she says. I want my old life back. I don't want this marriage. She's articulating her authentic preference, the thing that's been suppressed under pharmaceutical fog and social pressure finally spoken clearly. The bride version of herself appears. They face each other with the familiar accusation, I thought I killed you. You're the version that was supposed to be erased. But the bride Hinako persists, attacking, trying to force the merger that will eliminate the resisting self. Hinako beats her, maintains her separation, refuses the identity fusion. Then Kotoyuki appears. But in this ending, his supernatural nature becomes explicit in ways it hasn't in previous paths. Who are you? Hinako asks, suddenly uncertain whether the man she's been seeing in the dream wedding world is actually human. Kotoyuki responds with his own question. I could ask the same of you. Hinako would never act this way. You're not the woman I was going to marry. This exchange reveals the split from Kotoyuki's perspective. He thought he knew who his arranged marriage bride would be. He understood the social contract. He would get a wife who'd been prepared by her family to fulfill that role, who'd been shaped by tradition and expectation into someone compatible with the marriage system. But the Hinako destroying altars and running from the ceremony is someone else entirely, someone whose resistance has made her unrecognizable as the bride he was promised. Kotoyuki demands to know how Hinako entered this sacred ground. He's seeing her presence in the dream wedding world as intrusion rather than her natural right to be there. This is fascinating psychological detail. From his perspective, the resisting Hinako is the imposter, the false version contaminating what should have been a pure ritual space. The doll appears in the corner, witnessing this confrontation, representing the part of Hinako's psyche that's observing all of this with the clarity of childhood perspective, uncontaminated by adult rationalizations. Then Shu arrives. He attacks Kotoyuki with his characteristic protectiveness, trying to physically stop the marriage by eliminating the groom. But Kotoyuki transforms, taking his true form. He's not just a man in a fox mask. He's actually something supernatural, a yokai who fell in love with a human woman and has been trying to follow human courtship traditions to win her honorably. Just what the hell are you? Shu demands. Kotoyuki's response is one of the game's most crucial speeches. I am nothing more than a man who fell in love. Ever since, I've wanted nothing more than your hand and your happiness. I shall make you my wife. Yet out of love and respect for you, I forced myself to abide by the rules of human courtship. But if by honoring your traditions I risk losing you, I'm afraid we will have to do things my way from now on. This reframes the entire arranged marriage. It wasn't purely a social arrangement between families. Kotoyuki, whether fox spirit or human with supernatural connections, genuinely fell in love with Hinako. He chose her specifically. He tried to do everything correctly according to human social customs, going through the proper channels, following the ritual steps, respecting her culture's marriage traditions. He was trying to be honorable, but his honorable approach is failing because Hinako doesn't want to be married to someone she didn't choose. Regardless of how correctly he followed traditions, she never agreed to respect. So Kotoyuki shifts strategies. He threatens to abandon the human rules and simply take her. Abandon your world so that the memory of your presence fades away. In time, the missing posters will crumble to dust and be carried off by the wind. They will forget your face, and they will remember you as nothing more than this, the helpless girl who was spirited away by a fox. This is the darker folklore element emerging fully. The fox wedding isn't just metaphor. Kotoyuki is genuinely a supernatural entity who can abduct humans into the spirit world, make them disappear from their previous lives, transform them into brides for yokai. The arranged marriage was his attempt to avoid doing that, to win Hinako through human methods. But when human methods fail, he's prepared to use supernatural compulsion. Shu stands between Hinako and this threat. They face Kotoyuki together, and then Kotoyuki does something unexpected. He surrenders. My love, he says to Shu, you stayed with me until the end. Thank you, in spite of everything. I won't forget your kindness, so thank you for everything. The phrasing here is crucial. Kotoyuki calls Shu my love, suggesting their confrontations throughout the game created a bond Kotoyuki respects. He acknowledges Shu's persistence, his loyalty to Hinako, his refusal to abandon her despite every pressure to do so. And Kotoyuki releases his claim. He's going to stay behind and settle matters, tell everyone the wedding is off, handle the social consequences so Hinako and Shu can escape. This is the moment that defines the good ending. Kotoyuki choosing Hinako's happiness over his own desires. He fell in love with her, pursued her through proper channels, and when he realized forcing the marriage would destroy rather than win her, he let her go. It's tragic from his perspective. He did everything right by his culture's standards, genuinely loved her, offered her a future that many women in 1960 Japan would have accepted gratefully. But Hinako didn't want it, and Kotoyuki loved her enough to respect that. Before Shu and Hinako leave, Kotoyuki has a final exchange with Shu. The two men recognize each other as rivals who can respect each other's devotion to Hinako. I remember playing Space Wars with you back in the day, Shu says, referencing shared history that suggests Shu and Kotayuki knew each other before the arranged marriage, that there was friendship between them, that the marriage complicated. That means you're one of us then, Shu continues. Our comrade in arms. Kotayuki accepts the designation but warns, I suggest you leave. I am still a monster after all, and won't hesitate to consume you if given the chance. The term monster here functions on multiple levels. Kotayuki might be literal yokai capable of supernatural harm, or he might be using monster metaphorically to describe what he's become through this process. Someone who was prepared to abduct and transform a woman against her will. Someone who let love curdle into possession. See you later, comrade, Shu says. They part with mutual respect, enemies who recognize they were both trying to protect or love the same person, just with incompatible visions of what that protection or love required. Hinako and Shu run. They sprint out of the shrine, out of the dream wedding world, into something that feels like objective reality for the first time in the entire game. They're escaping together. Shu saved her. He allowed Shimizu Hinako to continue existing. They're going to build whatever life they can outside the social structures that tried to destroy her autonomy. Are you all right? Shu asks when they stop running. Hinako confirms she is and thanks him. If you hadn't come to help, she says, I wouldn't have been brave enough to go on. She's crediting Shu with her courage, seeing his presence as what made resistance possible. But Shu corrects her perception. That's not it. That's the opposite of why I decided to help you. I helped because you showed so much courage. It took me way too long to find that courage, though. I caused everyone so much trouble. This exchange reveals Shu's character growth. Throughout the game, he's been paralyzed by conflicting desires, wanting Hinako to stay with him while believing the arranged marriage might actually be best for her. He gave her the pills to help her, accept what he couldn't prevent. But in this ending, he finally found the courage to prioritize what she wanted over what everyone else thought was right. He's taking responsibility for his delays, for the times he failed to act, for his role in making her situation more difficult. Hinako calls him partner, using the term that's defined their relationship throughout. They're together, properly together now, no longer hiding their connection behind the ambiguity of childhood friendship. Shu jokes that she looks really weird in that wedding kimono. She responds that he looks really weird in formal attire. The moment is light, almost happy, suggesting that maybe this is the ending where Hinako gets what she wanted. But then the game adds a final detail that complicates everything. A news broadcast plays, describing geological disasters striking the region. Geysers have begun reaching approximately 50 meters in height and over the past 3 weeks have shown no signs of letting up. Water temperatures and hydrogen sulfide gas concentrations continue to increase dramatically. Fires have spread to multiple locations. All residents of Ibisugaoka have been ordered to evacuate. The town is being destroyed. Whether this is supernatural consequence of Hinako breaking the fox wedding or natural disaster that was always coming, the game doesn't specify. But the timing is suggestive. Hinako rejected the marriage, destroyed the altar, fled with Shu, and immediately afterward the region becomes uninhabitable. Everyone she knew, everyone who attended the wedding, everyone who tried to push her toward the arranged marriage or tried to support her, they're all being evacuated from Ebisugaoka because the land itself has become hostile. This ending detail asks uncomfortable questions. Did Hinako's resistance cause this disaster? Is this punishment for breaking the social and supernatural contracts the marriage represented? Or is this liberation, Eva Gallica being rendered uninhabitable so she can never be forced to return to the place that imprisoned her? The good ending refuses to clarify. It leaves you with the image of Hinako and Shu together, free, but also with the knowledge that freedom came at tremendous cost, that an entire community was displaced in the wake of her escape. There's another reading available too. Maybe the disaster isn't real. Maybe this news broadcast is another layer of Hinako's dissociative perception, her guilt over abandoning her family and community manifesting as fantasy that the town itself is dying without her, that her departure causes catastrophe. This interpretation would align with the game's pattern of blurring real and hallucinatory until they're indistinguishable. The good ending leaves players in strange emotional territory. Hinako escaped. She's with Shu. She maintained her identity as Shimizu Hinako. These are victories, but the cost includes the destruction or abandonment of her entire previous world, the transformation of Kotoyuki from potential life partner into tragic figure whose genuine love was rejected, and the implication that escape required disaster-level consequences that affected innocent people. This is where Silent Hill F's thesis about identity becomes most pointed. Can you ever really escape the systems that shaped you without destroying something essential in the process? Hinako wanted to be free. She achieved freedom, but that freedom exists in a void where her previous life has been obliterated, where she can never return, where the person she's become is defined by what she rejected rather than what she chose to build. The good ending also doesn't address Hinako's friends. What happened to Sakuko, who felt betrayed by Hinako's changing relationships? What happened to Rinko, whose jealousy poisoned their friendship? What happened to Junko, who tried to give Hinako choices but was pushed away? These relationships don't get resolution in the good ending. They're left behind, casualties of Hinako's escape, people she loved or was connected to, who no longer fit into the life she's building with Shu. This matters because it reveals the good ending's central tragedy. Hinako gained freedom by burning bridges so completely there's no path back. She didn't integrate her past and future. She didn't find a way to maintain multiple important relationships. She chose one person, Shu, and everything and everyone else became sacrifices required to make that choice possible. Whether that trade was worth it depends entirely on whether you value autonomy over community, whether you believe the right to choose your own path justifies abandoning people who depended on you. The game doesn't judge Hinako's choice, but it does insist you feel its weight. The good ending is good because Hinako survives with her identity intact and with someone who loves her. But it's also not entirely good because that survival required so much destruction. This is Silent Hill doing what it does best, taking what should be a triumph and infecting it with just enough ambiguity and cost that you're not sure whether to celebrate or mourn. Chapter 5. The True Ending, where identity dissolves into something stranger. The true ending carries that designation because it represents the game's complete vision, the ending that requires the most thorough playthrough and reveals layers the other endings deliberately conceal. This is where Silent Hill F stops being ambiguous about Hinako's fate and shows you what actually happens when someone's identity fractures under pressure this severe. What it shows you is uncomfortable, melancholic, and beautiful in ways that horror rarely attempts. The true ending begins at the shrine altar, with Junko confronting Hinako, but the dialogue shifts into different territory. Hinako speaks with unusual clarity for someone who's been dissociating throughout the entire game. She says someone is toying with all of them, manipulating the situation. One version of her wants the marriage, the other wants to stop it completely. Everyone has been pressuring, rushing, forcing. But these are battles they both must fight, meaning both versions of Hinako need to resolve this conflict, rather than having it resolved for them by external forces. Junko listens and then turns silently to her right, as though seeing something Hinako and the player cannot. Then Junko apologizes. She apologizes to her sister, to their mother, To their father, she says she's been a terrible daughter, but if you truly want nothing more than for me to be happy, then please let me do this. The strange shift in pronouns here, Junko speaking about being a terrible daughter and seeking permission to act, suggests something crucial. Junko and Hinako might be the same person. This reading, supported by details throughout the true ending, proposes that Junko isn't Hinako's sister, but another identity fragment, another dissociated part of the same fractured psyche. Throughout the game, Hinako has been told, "Why can't you be more like your sister Junko?" Internalizing Junko as the idealized version of herself she can never become. In dissociative identity disorder, it's common for alternate identities to form around internalized expectations or idealized self-concepts. Junko might be the part of Hinako that can meet their father's standards, that's competent and acceptable and worthy of love. Whether this reading is correct or whether Junko is literally Hinako's sister, the crucial moment comes next. Hinako walks to the altar, Junko watching from behind, and she destroys it. The bride version of herself appears immediately. Why must we fight to the death just for one of us to survive this nightmare? Hinako asks. It's the question that's driven the entire game. Why can't both identities coexist? Why must choosing oneself mean killing the other? The two versions of Hinako come together, but something goes wrong. They start to strangle each other, hands on each other's throats, locked in mutual destruction. This is what happens when dissociated identity fragments can't integrate successfully. They attack each other, each seeing the other as the threat preventing wholeness. Then a voice speaks that doesn't belong to anyone we've met. For eons, all this rage and spite have festered within me, and to this day, smolder yet. You will give me an insignificant branch. Your flesh means nothing to me. This is something ancient speaking through the conflict, something that's been waiting to emerge. The game doesn't explicitly identify this entity, but the language suggests accumulated historical trauma. Generations of women who've been forced into marriages they didn't choose, whose rage never got expression, whose suffering was buried under social expectations, and has been waiting for someone like Hinako, whose resistance is strong enough to channel it. Kotoyuki separates the two Hinakos, pulling them apart before they kill each other. But as he does, he becomes possessed by that ancient voice, by whatever force has been manipulating events towards this confrontation. The voice speaks through Kotoyuki's body. Once in a blue moon, humankind produces an extraordinary girl who is blessed with divine power. Upon her birth, a spell is placed on our clan's successor that stirs within him a desperate desire to go and seek out that extraordinary girl and make her his wife. This revelation reframes everything. The arranged marriage wasn't purely social arrangement between human families. It was supernatural binding, a spell that compels fox spirits to seek out women with specific spiritual qualities. Kotoyuki didn't choose to fall in love with Hinako. He was compelled by magic placed on him at birth. Magic that identified Hinako as someone with divine power, someone whose spirit is valuable enough to justify crossing the boundary between human and yokai worlds. The ancient voice continues. In the past, we relied on our cunning, seducing our brides with clever deceits. But this generation's heir, failing to charm his bride-to-be, demonstrates what an inexperienced failure he is. The voice is mocking Kotoyuki, calling him inadequate because he couldn't successfully manipulate Hinako into willing participation in the marriage. Previous fox spirits were better at deception, better at making abduction feel like choice. Kotoyuki's honesty, his attempt to follow human courtship rules, his genuine love for Hinako, these are being framed as weaknesses by the older force that views humans as resources to be acquired through any means necessary. Hinako defends him. Kotoyuki, she says, all he wanted was for us to get married. and be happy together. He tried so hard. He was alone all that time. Don't laugh. Don't you dare laugh at him. What he suffered, you will never understand. You monster. This is extraordinary moment. Hinako recognizing Kotoyuki's genuine victimhood within the system that was forcing them together. He didn't choose to be bound by the spell. He didn't choose to fall in love with someone who would reject him. He tried his best to be honorable within an impossible situation, and now he's being possessed and mocked by the very traditions he tried to respect. Hinako fights the entity possessing Kotoyuki. The battle manifests as defeating a beast that represents passion, energy, aggression, and powerful emotions in Japanese mythology. This is Hinako fighting not just for her own freedom, but for Kotoyuki's freedom too, trying to liberate him from the supernatural compulsion that's controlled his life as much as the arranged marriage has controlled hers. She defeats the beast. All that remains is the doll, her childhood self. The only memory she has of her previous life that's still pure and untainted. Both versions of Hinako, the one who wanted the marriage and the one who resisted, exist in the same space now without trying to destroy each other. Kotoyuki rushes them into another room. He apologizes profusely, explaining that someone, likely a family elder, had too much to drink and is angry about the altar's destruction. The banging on wooden doors grows louder. Something is trying to break in, trying to punish Hinako for her resistance or trying to force the marriage to continue despite everything. Kotoyuki says he'll resolve the conflict. The two versions of Hinako say they will speak to each other, and if the love Kotoyuki had for either of them is true, she'll consider resuming the marriage negotiations. This is compromise, both versions of Hinako agreeing to exist simultaneously, to talk rather than fight, to explore whether marriage might be possible on their terms rather than on the terms the system imposed. The three of them hug. Hinako, and Kotoyuki embrace as family or as potential family, united against whatever's trying to break through the door. Then the monster breaks in and everything fades to white. When the scene returns, Hinako is back in Ebusugaoka village. She's at the top of a hill with a letter left by Kotoyuki. The letter is tender, describing his attempts to live a fuller life, to enjoy simple pleasures like eating cheap rice crackers with children, to rediscover his lost childhood, to become someone worthy of love through authentic living rather than through fulfilling supernatural obligations. The letter concludes, I intend to become reacquainted with my inner child, discover my own dreams, and live life to the fullest. And once I've done so, I hope to reevaluate my feelings for you. Kotoyuki is releasing Hinako from the immediate marriage pressure, while leaving open the possibility that in the future, after they've both grown into more complete versions of themselves, they might choose each other freely. Hinako reads this and speaks to herself, both versions present and communicating. One version says, Kotoyuki taught her something. You can grow to love someone deeply. She wants to live a life so full of passion and purpose that she might one day propose to Kotoyuki herself, carrying on where they left off but on her terms, as her choice. The other version of Hinako says she wants to pour her heart into something too, but right now she's unsure what that is. She needs time to discover who she is outside of everyone else's expectations. The two Hinakos explore Ebusugaoka together. The town is quiet, empty of other people. No one is there to tell them what to do, to pressure them, to demand they become anything other than what they are. It's peaceful. They can do whatever they want, decide where they want to go. Hinako is now in a world of peace, a world where she can rest. The ending's final image shows both versions of Hinako coexisting in this emptied town, exploring, talking to each other, beginning the work of integration. They're not fighting anymore. They're learning to be parts of the same person, aspects of a complete identity, that can hold contradictory desires without fragmenting. But then the game adds its final complication. The news broadcast again, reporting the two male victims dead at the scene. The implication is devastating. Kotoyuki died, likely killed during the wedding by someone trying to protect Hinako or by Hinako herself during a psychotic episode. Shu died, possibly killed during the same incident. The men who loved her, who fought over her, who represented her two possible futures, are both dead. The true ending suggests that Hinako died too. The peaceful, empty town where she explores with both versions of herself isn't reality but afterlife. The space where her fragmented psyche can finally achieve the integration that was impossible during life. She's dead, killed in the violence at the wedding ceremony, and what we're witnessing is her spirit resolving its internal conflicts in whatever comes after death. This reading explains why Ebisugaoka is empty, why it's so peaceful, why both versions of Hinako can exist without conflict. She's no longer constrained by the physical reality that forced her to choose one identity over another. Death has given her the space to be multiple things simultaneously, to explore who she is without external pressure, to achieve the psychological integration that life denied her. The true ending is melancholic rather than tragic. Yes, Hinako died. Yes, the men who loved her died. Yes, the arranged marriage destroyed everyone it touched. But in death, Hinako finds what she couldn't find in life: peace, self-acceptance, the ability to acknowledge that she contained multitudes, and that those multitudes didn't have to be at war with each other. This is Silent Hill at its most philosophically sophisticated. The town grants you what you need most, even if what you need is death. For Hinako, whose entire life was structured around impossible choices and identity fragmentation, death becomes the only space where she can be whole. The horror isn't that she died. The horror is that living in the world that created her meant remaining fractured forever. That wholeness was only possible by leaving life entirely. The true ending also completes Kotoyuki's arc. He was victim of the supernatural system as much as Hinako was victim of the social system. He couldn't choose who he loved. He couldn't escape the compulsion. His attempts to be honorable within that system were mocked by his elders as weakness, and he died without getting to marry the woman he'd been magically bound to love. But the letter he left suggests he found something valuable in the process. He discovered that he could be more than his predetermined role, that he could have an inner life, separate from his obligations, that he could dream of a future he chose rather than one chosen for him. Whether he actually wrote that letter before dying, or whether it's Hinako's imagination of what he might have said if he'd survived, the letter represents Kotoyuki's potential for growth beyond the supernatural script he was born into. That potential died with him, but acknowledging it existed matters. It transforms him from antagonist into fellow victim, someone trapped in systems neither of them created and both of them tried to resist. The true ending validates both Hinakos. The one who wanted the marriage wasn't betraying herself. She was responding to the genuine appeal of stability, social acceptance, and Kotoyuki's authentic care. The one who resisted wasn't being childish or difficult. She was asserting her right to self-determination against systems that wanted to erase her. Both responses were valid. Both were survival strategies. And the tragedy is that society structured her life so that choosing one meant killing the other. In death, that choice is no longer necessary. Both Hinakos get to exist. Both get to explore who they might become. Both get to process what happened and slowly merge into something that honors all of who Hinako was and could have been. The true ending offers resolution through death, peace through ending, and the suggestion that sometimes the town's mercy is letting you escape a life that was breaking you. Chapter 6: The UFO Ending, When Horror Becomes Absurd. After the emotional weight of the previous endings, the UFO ending serves a specific function that Silent Hill games have used since the second entry, breaking tension through absurdity, offering comic relief while simultaneously commenting on the franchise's themes in ways that are more insightful than they initially appear. The UFO ending is deliberately silly, featuring aliens and robots and conspiracy theories that seem completely disconnected from the painful story of identity and trauma the other endings explore. But underneath the jokes, this ending does something clever. It provides Hinako and her friends with an external threat that unites them, offering the friendship reconciliation that none of the serious endings achieve. The UFO ending begins with Hinako and her friends gathered together in town. Instead of the fog and psychological horror that characterize the other endings, the atmosphere is lighter, almost playful. Shu is explaining his theory about why the town is empty. Aliens. He's convinced that extraterrestrials have been eyeing Earth for a long time, waiting for the chance to snatch up humans and replace them with alien duplicates. Oro, Hinako, me, any one of us could be an alien merely pretending to be the real person, Shu warns with exaggerated seriousness that makes it clear this ending operates in a different tonal register than the others. Hinako protests that she's not an alien. Shu says there's a way to prove identities. They need to test each other. But then Sakuko appears, or rather a robot appears that looks like Sakuko. Shu explains, this is Robako, an anti-extraterrestrial search and destroy robot he designed and built to detect aliens masquerading as humans and automatically eliminate them. The robot's battery has died, which means it just killed something it identified as an alien Sakuko. Was the Sakuko we knew throughout the game actually an alien? Did the robot save them from being replaced? The premise is absurd, but it creates space for character moments that the serious endings can't accommodate. Hinako is nervous, worried she might have a hint of alien on her, and that's why the robot was chasing her. Maybe someone close to her is an alien. Maybe her memories have been tampered with. The paranoia mirrors the real psychological horror of the game, where Hinako can't trust her own perceptions, but here it's played for comedy rather than existential dread. Shu proposes a test. Each person needs to say something only the real version would know. Something too specific or embarrassing for an alien duplicate to have access to. Hinako goes first, revealing that Rinko once took some of Shu's hair and hid it inside her pillow, trying a love spell that might make her dream of him. It's embarrassing admission that gets Rinko flustered, but it proves Hinako knows intimate details about her friend's secret crushes. Rinko retaliates with her own revelation. Hinako once forgot her underwear in the locker room at camp and didn't claim it when the teacher asked whose it was. The detail is mortifying, but confirms these are real people, with real histories rather than alien replacements wearing their skins. The game continues this pattern, each friend revealing embarrassing secrets about the others, moments of vulnerability and shared history that prove their authenticity. Shu reveals he kept a page from an adult magazine behind his bookshelf and once cut out a photo of a classmate's head and taped it to a swimsuit poster. A confession so creepy that everyone reacts with disgust. Sakuko remembers details about when each girl started wearing a bra, information that proves she's been observing them carefully, but also gets her labeled an enemy to all women for knowing such things. The tone is playful, the stakes are non-existent, and the whole scenario functions as pressure release valve after the intensity of the previous endings. But it's also giving Hinako's friend group something they never got in the serious endings: reconciliation through shared laughter, the ability to acknowledge their flaws and embarrassing moments without those moments destroying their relationships, the experience of being united against a common threat rather than fractured by internal conflicts. The ending concludes with Hinako returning home, where her mother says she'll make her favorite Hamburg steak for dinner. Hinako corrects her. Mother, I told you that's Junko's favorite. It's a small moment of asserting individual preference, of being seen as herself rather than confused with her sister. The UFO ending, despite its absurdity, gives Hinako what she needed most: to be recognized as distinct individual with her own preferences, to have friends who know her well enough to prove her identity through shared memories, to have a family dinner waiting that acknowledges who she actually is. This ending's place in Silent Hill F's structure matters. After experiencing Hinako's identity dissolution, her death, her psychological break, her forced marriage, players need relief. The UFO ending provides that while also demonstrating an important truth. If Hinako's problems had been external rather than internal and systemic, if she'd faced alien invasion instead of arranged marriage and family abuse, she and her friends could have united to fight it. The tragedy of her actual situation is that the threats were internal and institutional. Enemies you can't defeat with robots, or friendship tests, systems embedded so deeply in her culture that resistance felt like madness. The UFO ending also comments on the game's own unreliable narration. If aliens can replace people, if reality can be that fundamentally unstable, then how can we trust anything we've seen in the other endings? Maybe they're all equally false or true. Maybe the point is that objective truth doesn't exist when you're dealing with psychological horror this severe. The UFO ending's absurdity highlights the impossibility of knowing what really happened to Hinako, suggesting that even the most serious-seeming ending might be constructed from unreliable perception and dissociative confusion. Silent Hill's UFO endings have always served this meta-textual function. They remind you that you're engaging with constructed narrative rather than documented reality, that the games are stories being told with specific perspectives and biases, that the invitation to take any ending as definitive truth should be resisted. Silent Hill F's version does this while also providing genuine character moments that show who Hinako and her friends could have been if circumstances had been different, if their conflicts could have been resolved through unity rather than fracture. Chapter 7. The Rituals That Build a Cage. To fully understand what Silent Hill F is doing with its endings, we need to examine the wedding rituals Hinako experiences throughout the game. These aren't arbitrary horror set pieces. Every ritual corresponds to actual Shinto wedding traditions, ceremonies that have been performed in Japan for centuries as part of the process that transforms a woman from daughter in her birth family to wife in her husband's family. The game takes these rituals and shows them from the perspective of someone who doesn't want the transformation they represent, turning cultural tradition into psychological horror. The first ritual Hinako encounters is the presentation of the kaiken. This ceremonial dagger is small, ornamental rather than functional, traditionally hidden in the bride's kimono during the wedding ceremony. Its symbolism carries multiple layers. It represents the bride's commitment to protect her chastity and her family's honor, her resolve to defend herself if necessary, and historically, her willingness to commit suicide rather than bring shame to her husband's household. The kaiken is simultaneously protective talisman and instrument of potential self-destruction. When Kotoyuki gives Hinako the kaiken in the dream wedding world, he's marking the beginning of her transformation. She's being armed, yes, but armed with a weapon that tradition says she should turn on herself if she fails in her duties as wife. The game later subverts this symbolism brilliantly. In the normal ending, the kaiken becomes the murder weapon Hinako uses against the wedding guests she perceives as monsters. The blade meant to protect her husband's honor becomes the instrument of rebellion against the marriage itself. The purification ritual comes next. In traditional Shinto weddings, A priest conducts ceremonies to cleanse the couple and guests of impurities before they enter the sacred space of marriage. Water is used, prayers are recited, and the ritual creates a boundary between the contaminated outside world and the pure space of the ceremony. Hinako experiences this purification as battle against Sakuko, who appears as priestess conducting the ritual. The symbolism is pointed. Sakuko, who represents Hinako's past friendships and her resistance to change, must be defeated and cleansed away as impurity before the marriage can proceed. The game forces Hinako to participate in rituals that frame her previous life, her friendships, her individual identity as contamination requiring removal. This is the psychological violence of the marriage system made literal. You're not joining a new family while maintaining your old connections. You're being purified of everything that came before, scrubbed clean so you can be rebuilt according to your husband's family's specifications. The Sansankudo ceremony involves the bride and groom taking 3 sips each from 3 different cups of sake, representing the joining of 2 families through shared drinking. The number 3 is significant in Shinto tradition, representing heaven, earth, and humanity. By drinking 3 times from 3 cups, the couple is symbolically uniting across all dimensions of existence. Hinako experiences this ritual in a scene where she and Kotoyuki share drinks together, a moment that should feel intimate and bonding, but instead feels like surrender, like each sip is erasing more of who she was. The exchange of wedding rings follows traditional patterns adapted from Western customs that entered Japan in the modern era. But the ritual that disturbs Hinako most is the Tsunokakushi, the bridal hood worn during the ceremony. Traditionally white, this hood symbolizes the bride suppressing her negative emotions, particularly jealousy and anger, as she enters her husband's family. It represents the expectation that she'll control herself, hide any feelings that might cause conflict, present only the acceptable face of wifely devotion. The Tsunokakushi appears in the game as masks worn during the fox wedding sequences. Kotoyuki wears his fox mask, hiding his supernatural nature behind the appearance of human groom. Hinako is encouraged to wear her own mask, to hide her resistance and fear behind compliant acceptance. The game makes explicit what the tradition implies. Marriage requires you to mask your authentic self, to perform a role rather than exist as you actually are. Then comes the most horrifying ritual adaptation in the game, the marking ceremony where Hinako has her arm taken. Traditional weddings don't include dismemberment, obviously, but the game is literalizing the phrase taking your hand in marriage. The arm being severed and replaced represents the transformation of Hinako's body into something that belongs to the marriage rather than to herself. She's being marked, branded, physically altered to reflect her new status as married woman. This ritual sequence is where Silent Hill F's horror reaches its peak. The game shows you that even consensual, culturally respected traditions can feel like violence when you're the one being subjected to them against your will. The rituals themselves aren't evil. Countless women have participated in these ceremonies and found them meaningful, beautiful, and affirming. But for Hinako, who didn't choose this marriage, who doesn't want the transformation, every ritual is another violation, another piece of herself being cut away and replaced with something that fits the wife-shaped hole the system has prepared for her. The fox wedding folklore adds supernatural dimension to all of this. The Kitsune no Yomeri, the fox wedding that occurs during sun showers, exists in Japanese. Tradition as an omen, something that happens in the space between worlds. When rain falls while the sun shines, the boundary between human and yokai realms becomes permeable, and fox spirits can cross over to conduct their ceremonies. These weddings are described in folklore as elaborate processions of lights moving through forests, beautiful and eerie, and dangerous for humans who witness them. Kotoyuki, being a fox spirit, or being possessed by fox spirit traditions, transforms Hinako's arranged marriage from purely social obligation into something that involves supernatural binding. She's not just marrying a man, she's potentially being taken into the yokai world, transformed from human woman with agency into fox bride whose existence serves supernatural purposes beyond her comprehension or control. The folklore suggests that women who become fox brides sometimes disappear completely from human society, spirited away into the other where they live in eternal service to their fox husbands. Sometimes they return changed, no longer fully human, touched by the supernatural in ways that make them unrecognizable to their former families. And sometimes they're found dead in forests or fields, their spirits having been consumed by the yokai who claim to love them. Silent Hill Oi uses this folklore to amplify the horror of Hinako's situation. Even if the arranged marriage were to a kind human man, even if Kotoyuki were genuinely loving and Hinako would be materially comfortable, the rituals themselves would still represent transformation that erases her previous identity. But by adding the fox wedding layer, the game suggests something more complete. Hinako isn't just changing her family name and household, she's being fundamentally altered, taken into a reality where the rules are different, where her humanity itself might be the price of the marriage. This helps explain why Hinako's resistance is so fierce. She's not just avoiding an uncomfortable social arrangement, she's fighting for her continued existence as the person she is. The dissociative splitting into multiple Hinakos represents her psyche's desperate attempt to save at least one version of herself from the transformation that will destroy the others. If she must become a bride, maybe the part of her that doesn't want marriage can escape, can hide, can survive in some protected space within her mind until the danger passes. But the danger doesn't pass. The rituals continue accumulating, each one bringing Hinako closer to the point of no return where transformation becomes irreversible. And her mind, recognizing this, begins implementing the most extreme protective measure available. Dissociation so complete that she experiences multiple realities simultaneously, each one representing a different outcome to her impossible situation. The endings, then, are different ritual outcomes. The normal ending shows what happens when Hinako resists during the actual ceremony, breaking the ritual sequence through violent rejection. The bad ending shows what happens when resistance fails and the rituals complete their transformation. The good ending shows what happens when Hinako escapes before the rituals can finish, fleeing with Shu before the final binding takes effect. The true ending shows what happens when the supernatural elements underlying the rituals claim their price, when both Hinako and Kotoyuki are destroyed by the forces that were using them for purposes neither understood. Every ending is a different answer to the question, what happens when you put someone through transformation rituals they don't consent to? And the answer Silent Hill F gives is that nothing good happens. Either the person breaks violently, or they're broken by the process, or they escape at catastrophic cost, or everyone involved dies, and the only resolution comes in whatever exists after life. There's no version where Hinako goes through with the marriage and finds happiness. The game refuses to offer that outcome because it would validate the system that victimized her. This is where we need to acknowledge something that makes Silent Hill F more challenging than previous Silent Hill games. Its horror is cultural rather than purely psychological. James Sunderland's guilt over killing Mary is universal. Anyone from any culture can understand that guilt and recognize it in themselves. But Hinako's arranged marriage horror is specific to cultures where family obligations override individual preferences, where women's autonomy is subordinated to social stability, where tradition carries more weight than personal desire. Western players might watch Hinako's story and think simply leave, choose yourself, reject the marriage. But that response misunderstands the total system Hinako exists within. Leaving means abandoning her family, potentially bringing shame that could affect her parents' and sister's social standing. It means losing all social support, becoming someone with no place in the community, no legitimate identity. In 1960 Japan, a woman who rejected an arranged marriage wouldn't just be free, she'd be outcast, someone who violated the fundamental social contract, someone who might never find employment or housing or acceptance. The game shows this through the disaster that follows Hinako's resistance, whether that disaster is literal geological catastrophe or metaphorical representation of social collapse. The message is clear. When you reject the system punishes you by withdrawing all support and protection. Hinako's freedom comes at the price of losing her entire world. That's not triumph, that's tragedy. But Silent Hill F also refuses to validate the system by showing a happy arranged marriage outcome. The game takes a position. Some cultural traditions are incompatible with human flourishing. Some obligations are illegitimate regardless of how long they've been practiced. Some prices are too high to pay for social stability. Hinako's arranged marriage destroys her whether she accepts or rejects it. The only variable is how the destruction manifests. You're over halfway through now, and if you're still here, what comes next connects everything we've covered to the larger question Silent Hill has always asked. What does it mean when the town shows you truth you can't face about yourself? Because Hinako's story isn't just about arranged marriage. It's about identity fragmentation under pressure, about dissociation as survival mechanism, about the impossibility of being multiple things simultaneously when the world demands you choose one self and abandon all others. Every ending reveals a different facet of that psychological diamond, and together they create a portrait of a mind destroying itself, trying to protect what it loves most. Chapter 8: Dissociation, Identity, and the Selves We Abandon. Silent Hill operates on psychological principles that are clinically documented in trauma literature. When Hinako takes the red pills and begins experiencing two simultaneous realities, when she perceives herself as multiple distinct entities fighting for dominance, when she can't distinguish memory from hallucination or past from present, she's experiencing severe dissociative symptoms that real people develop in response to unbearable circumstances. Dissociation is the mind's circuit breaker. When psychological pain exceeds your capacity to process it, when reality becomes literally unbearable, consciousness protects itself by fragmenting. You might experience derealization, where the world feels unreal, dreamlike, observed through glass. You might experience depersonalization, where you feel disconnected from your own body and thoughts, like you're watching yourself from outside. In severe cases, you might develop dissociative identity disorder, where distinct identity states emerge, each one carrying different memories, preferences, and ways of relating to the world. Hinako's splitting into multiple versions of herself represents this protective fragmentation. The bride Hinako who wants the marriage isn't a different person. She's a part of Hinako's psyche that has accepted the marriage as inevitable and is trying to make the best of impossible circumstances. This part can find the positive aspects of Kotoyuki's attention, can appreciate that he's kinder than her father, can imagine a future where marriage provides escape from her current family's abuse, even if it means entering a different family's control. The resisting Hinako who destroys altars and fights against the transformation is equally valid. She's the part of Hinako that refuses to surrender her autonomy, that believes she deserves to choose her own path, that would rather face uncertainty and social rejection than live as someone else's possession. This part can't see any redeeming qualities in the arranged marriage because, from her perspective, consent is the only thing that could redeem it, and consent is precisely what she wasn't given. In a person with integrated identity, these two perspectives would exist as internal conflict. Hinako would feel pulled between acceptance and resistance, would experience ambivalence where part of her wants one thing while another part wants something incompatible. This is normal psychological experience. Most major life decisions involve conflicting desires that have to be negotiated through internal dialogue and eventual compromise. But Hinako's conflict exceeds the capacity for normal ambivalence. The stakes are too high. The pressure is too intense. The pharmaceutical dissociation has weakened the boundaries that usually keep contradictory desires integrated within single identity. So instead of internal conflict, Hinako experiences external conflict between what feel like separate people who happen to share her face and her memories. This is where Silent Hill F does something sophisticated with game mechanics. It makes you play the resisting Hinako while being hunted by the accepting Hinako. You experience the horror of being chased by yourself, of having your own alternative self become the monster you're fleeing. This creates visceral understanding of what dissociation feels like from the inside. The part of you that makes different choices than you would make, that wants things you've rejected, that threatens to take control and live your life in ways you find intolerable. That part becomes literally monstrous, something you have to fight and flee. The Shiromuku, the bride in white kimono stalking Hinako through the game, is the most elegant representation of this dynamic. It's not a ghost or demon. It's Hinako's future self, the person she'll become if the marriage completes, hunting her present self to force the transformation. The horror is temporal rather than supernatural. You're being chased by who you're afraid you'll become, and you can't escape because that person is you, will be. You already is you in potential form, waiting to actualize. The game's use of medication to enable this dissociation mirrors real-world concerns about how psychiatric drugs can be used for social control rather than healing. The red pills Shu gives Hinako do help her manage anxiety and pain. They allow her to continue functioning when untreated trauma would paralyze her. But they also make her more compliant, more suggestible, less able to maintain firm boundaries between self and other, reality and fantasy, acceptable and unacceptable outcomes. This parallels historical and ongoing concerns about medicating people, particularly women, to make them more accepting of circumstances that should be changed rather than endured. If you're anxious because your situation is genuinely threatening, the appropriate response is to change the situation, not to medicate away the anxiety that's trying to protect you. But changing systemic problems is difficult, expensive, and disruptive to social stability. It's easier to medicate individuals until they can tolerate the intolerable. Shu means well when he provides the pills. He genuinely wants to help Hinako, but he's chosen pharmaceutical intervention over addressing the root problem, which is that she's being forced into a marriage she doesn't want. He can't stop the marriage through his individual action. He lacks the social power to override family decisions and cultural traditions. So instead, he helps Hinako become someone who can survive the marriage, someone whose resistance is pharmacologically dampened enough that she won't shatter completely under the pressure. The tragedy is that his solution creates the conditions for even worse outcomes. The dissociation the pills enable doesn't make Hinako more resilient. It makes her more fragile, more vulnerable to complete psychological collapse. By the time we encounter her in the game's present, she's already fractured beyond normal integration. The pills didn't save her. They delayed her breaking until the break became catastrophic. This connects to larger questions about trauma treatment and adaptation. When someone is trapped in harmful circumstances they can't immediately escape, what's the ethical approach? Do you help them adapt to the harmful situation, developing coping mechanisms that allow them to endure? Or do you focus exclusively on escape, knowing that escape might not be possible? and that the person will suffer tremendously in the meantime. There's no simple answer. Real trauma therapists face these dilemmas constantly. Someone trapped in an abusive relationship but unable to leave due to financial dependence or child custody concerns needs coping skills to survive while working toward eventual escape. But teaching those coping skills runs the risk of making the abuse more tolerable and therefore more permanent, of accidentally enabling the victim to stay in circumstances they should flee. Hinako's situation is that dilemma at extremes, intensity. The arranged marriage is happening whether she agrees or not. Her family has already committed to it. The social machinery is in motion. Shu can't stop it. Hinako can't stop it through individual resistance, so Shu provides pharmaceutical help that allows her to endure, hoping that maybe once she's actually married, once the transition is complete, she'll find stability, and the dissociation will resolve. But that's not how dissociation works. Once your psyche has learned that fragmenting is a viable response to unbearable circumstances, once you've experienced the relief of splitting your consciousness so that only part of you has to endure the pain, you can't just reintegrate when circumstances improve. The fragmentation becomes its own problem, independent of the situation that caused it. This is why dissociative disorders are so persistent and difficult to treat. The coping mechanism that protected you also damages your capacity for coherent selfhood. The multiple endings represent different manifestations of this damage. The normal ending shows psychotic break, where Hinako's dissociation becomes so severe she can't distinguish humans from threats and commits violence while perceiving self-defense. The bad ending shows dissociative surrender, where one fragment wins by exhausting the others into submission. The good ending shows dissociative escape, where Hinako flees with one relationship intact, but all others severed. The true ending shows dissociative resolution through death, where only the ending of consciousness itself allows the fragments to coexist peacefully. Each ending is clinically plausible. Real people experiencing trauma of this severity develop each of these outcomes. Some become violent during psychotic episodes, triggered by overwhelming stress. Some surrender to harmful circumstances because resistance has exhausted their psychological resources. Some escape but lose most of their previous relationships and support systems in the process. And some die, either through suicide or through consequences of their trauma, finding in death the peace that life couldn't provide. Silent Hill F refuses to tell you which outcome is correct because all of them are correct. Hinako is simultaneously the person who killed wedding guests during a psychotic break, the person who accepted the marriage and lost herself, the person who escaped with Shu, and the person who died and achieved integration in whatever comes after. These aren't alternative timelines, they're alternative manifestations of the same dissociative fracture. Different ways of experiencing and expressing the same fundamental psychological catastrophe. This is the game's most ambitious narrative choice, refusing singular truth in favor of multiplicities that are all equally valid and all equally heartbreaking. It asks you to hold multiple contradictory realities in mind simultaneously, to accept that Hinako's story doesn't resolve into single definitive outcome but splinters into 5 separate outcomes that exist in superposition until you choose which one to believe, and whichever ending you choose to believe reveals something about your own psychology, your own biases about trauma and survival and identity. If you believe the normal ending, you're prioritizing the visible violence and legal consequences as the real story. If you believe the bad ending, you're acknowledging how often trauma victims are defeated by systems too large to fight. If you believe the good ending, you're valuing autonomy and escape even at tremendous cost. If you believe the true ending, you're finding melancholic beauty in death as resolution. If you believe the UFO ending, you're rejecting the framework entirely and insisting that absurdity is more honest than any attempt at coherent meaning. None of these choices is wrong. Silent Hill F is designed to support all of them, to reward each interpretation with details that confirm it while also maintaining details that contradict it. This is what makes it genuinely sophisticated horror. It understands that the scariest truths are the ones that can't be pinned down, the ones that shift depending on perspective, the ones that remain ambiguous no matter how much evidence you gather. Chapter 9: What the Town Does to People Who Can't Choose. Silent Hill as a location has always functioned as psychological amplifier. The town takes your internal conflicts and makes them external, takes your guilt and shame and fear and gives them bodies and voices and the ability to chase you through fog-shrouded streets. But Silent Hill F does something different with this premise. Hinako's conflicts aren't primarily about guilt over past actions. She didn't kill anyone before arriving. She didn't betray anyone in ways that would justify supernatural punishment. Her conflict is about present impossibility, about being forced to choose between identities that can't coexist when she wants to be all of them simultaneously. The town responds to this by creating a space where all versions of her can manifest simultaneously. The dreamlike wedding world isn't separate from reality. It's reality refracted through Hinako's dissociative perception, showing her the transformation happening to her in symbolic form while it's also happening in literal form. She experiences both the supernatural fox wedding and the mundane Shinto wedding ceremony, because from her interior perspective, they're the same thing. Processes that will erase who she is and replace her with someone else. Silent Hill has always been interested in people who can't accept truth about themselves, who need the town to show them what they've been denying. James couldn't accept that he murdered Mary out of anger and selfishness rather than mercy. Angela couldn't accept that she was molested by her father and that killing him didn't free her from the trauma. Eddie couldn't accept that he enjoyed hurting people who hurt him first, that his victimhood had transformed into sadism. Hinako's relationship to truth is more complex. She knows she doesn't want the marriage. That's not something she's denying. What she can't accept is that she also wants it. That part of her recognizes the marriage as escape from her father's abuse, as path to adult identity and social recognition, as connection to Kotayuki, who has shown her more kindness than most men in her life. She can't integrate these contradictory desires, can't hold both the truth that the marriage is violation and the truth that the marriage offers certain benefits. So the town splits her. It makes the contradiction visible by manifesting both desires as separate entities that can confront each other. This is Silent Hill's therapeutic intervention, forcing Hinako to acknowledge that she contains multitudes, that human beings are never singular or simple, that the part of her that wants the marriage is as authentic as the part that doesn't. But this intervention doesn't heal her. Silent Hill doesn't heal anyone. It just shows you the truth, and what you do with that truth determines your ending. Hinako sees herself split, sees both versions fighting for dominance, and the revelation doesn't integrate her. If anything, it makes the split more complete by validating both sides as legitimate rather than helping her reconcile them into coherent whole. This is where Silent Hill F diverges from earlier games in the series. Silent Hill 2 offers James multiple endings, but the leave ending represents genuine resolution, where he accepts responsibility for Mary's murder and chooses to continue living with that knowledge. It's not happy ending, but it is healing ending where psychological work has been completed. Silent Hill F offers no equivalent. None of Hinako's endings represent successful integration or healing. The best outcome, the true ending, requires death before integration becomes possible. The implication is devastating. Hinako's situation is one that can't be resolved through psychological work or self-acceptance. The problem isn't internal, It's external and systemic. No amount of self-knowledge will change that she's being forced into a marriage she doesn't want. No degree of acceptance will make the marriage compatible with her autonomy. The town can show her truth about herself all day long, but that truth doesn't empower her because the system constraining her doesn't care about her internal psychological state. This makes Silent Hill F a different kind of horror. Earlier games were about people who had to face uncomfortable truths about themselves, and that confrontation was the path to resolution. Silent Hill F is about someone who understands herself perfectly well but is trapped by external forces that her self-understanding can't overcome. The horror isn't internal. It's the horror of being powerless, of watching yourself be destroyed by systems you can see clearly but can't resist effectively. The arranged marriage functions as stand-in for any system that subordinates individual autonomy to collective goals. It could be capitalism forcing workers to sell their labor to survive. It could be military service requiring soldiers to kill strangers for national interests. It could be family obligations demanding children sacrifice their dreams to care for aging parents. Any situation where you understand what's happening to you, can articulate clearly why it's harmful, but lack the power to change it, creates this same horror. Hinako knows the marriage will erase her. She can describe the mechanisms precisely. She can predict the outcome accurately. None of that knowledge gives her the power to prevent it. This is the horror of consciousness without agency, awareness without ability to act on that awareness. You're trapped watching your own destruction in slow motion. And the fact that you understand what's happening only makes it worse, because you can't even take comfort in ignorance. The town's response is to create space where Hinako can act on her awareness. In the dream wedding world, she can destroy altars. She can fight the bride version of herself. She can ally with Shu against Kotayuki. She has agency in ways she lacks in mundane reality where the marriage proceeds regardless of her preferences. But that agency is illusory, or at least ambiguous. Is she actually changing anything? Or is she just experiencing elaborate dissociative fantasy while her body goes through with the marriage in reality? The endings can't answer that question definitively, because Silent Hill F is structured around the premise that subjective experience is the only reality that matters to the person experiencing it. From Hinako's perspective, she fought. She destroyed altars and confronted her other self, and made choices with real consequences. Whether those choices happened in objective reality or only in her dissociating mind is irrelevant to their psychological weight. She experienced resistance as real, and therefore it was real for her, which is the only her that exists. This philosophical position distinguishes Silent Hill F from games that treat reality as objective and external to consciousness. The game argues that reality is what you experience it to be, that your subjective perception is your reality, regardless of whether others share that perception. This is simultaneously validating and terrifying. Validating because it means Hinako's resistance matters even if it doesn't change external outcomes. Terrifying because it means she could be living in completely constructed reality with no way to access objective truth about her situation. The fog that characterizes every Silent Hill game takes on specific meaning here. It represents the uncertainty about what's real, the inability to see clearly beyond your immediate perception, the way truth remains perpetually obscured when consciousness is fragmenting. Hinako moves through fog both literal and psychological, never quite certain whether what she's experiencing is objective reality or dissociative hallucination, whether the people she encounters are really there or manifestations of her guilt and fear. And the game refuses to clear the fog. It doesn't give you moments of crystalline clarity where objective truth becomes visible. Every revelation comes embedded in more ambiguity. Every answer generates more questions. This is frustrating for players who want definitive understanding, who want to know what really happened. but it's psychologically accurate to severe dissociative states where certainty becomes impossible, where every memory could be false and every perception could be hallucination. The town does to Hinako what it does to everyone. It shows her herself in all her contradictions and conflicts and complexity. But unlike James or Angela or other Silent Hill protagonists, Hinako doesn't need to see herself. She already knows who she is. What she needs is power to act on that self-knowledge, and that's the one thing the town can't give her. It can create dreamlike spaces where she experiences agency, but it can't change the social reality constraining her. So the town offers her the only gifts it has: manifestation of her internal conflict, and multiple possible endings that exist in superposition, no single outcome more true than the others. Chapter 10: Marriage, Autonomy, and the Question That Haunts Every Ending. Every ending in Silent Hill F circles back to the same question. What does it mean to have an identity, to be someone, when the systems you exist within treat your selfhood as raw material to be shaped according to their needs? The arranged marriage is the mechanism that makes this question explicit, but the question applies far beyond marriage specifically. It's about the relationship between individual and system, between personal desire and collective obligation, between who you are and who you're expected to become. Hinako's tragedy is that both sides of this conflict have legitimate claims. The arranged marriage system exists because it served social functions that individuals couldn't accomplish alone. Marriage alliances created stability between families, established economic partnerships, produced children who would carry on family lines and traditions. The system prioritized collective well-being over individual preference, and for centuries that prioritization made sense in societies where individual survival depended on collective support. Hinako would not have survived to her 20s without her family and community. They fed her, housed her, protected her, educated her according to the standards of their time and place. The arranged marriage is the system's attempt to collect on that investment, to ensure that Hinako contributes to collective stability the way the collective contributed to her development. From the system's perspective, her resistance is selfishness, the betrayal of obligations she incurred simply by being born into a community that invested resources in her survival. But Hinako's perspective is equally valid. She didn't choose to be born into this system. She didn't consent to the obligation structure that treats her as resource rather than person. The community's investment in her survival doesn't give them ownership of her future, doesn't mean she owes them the sacrifice of her autonomy. She has the right to self-determination regardless of what the system invested in her. Because human rights exist independent of social contracts you never had the power to refuse. These two perspectives are philosophically irreconcilable. Either you believe collective obligations supersede individual preferences, or you believe individual autonomy is inviolable regardless of collective needs. There's no compromise position that satisfies both. You can't have autonomy. Either Hinako gets to choose or she doesn't. Silent Hill F doesn't try to resolve this philosophical conflict. Instead, it shows you what happens when irreconcilable values collide in a single human life. Hinako embodies the contradiction. She's the individual fighting for autonomy, and the social being embedded in obligations she can't simply shed. She contains both the truth that she deserves self-determination and the truth that her self-determination has costs for other people who depended on her fulfilling her assigned role. The endings show different ways this contradiction might resolve. The normal ending shows violent rebellion against the system, where Hinako physically fights her way out, but destroys lives and relationships in the process. The bad ending shows surrender to the system, where Hinako accepts that individual desire is less important than social stability, even when that acceptance requires psychological death. The good ending shows escape from the system, where Hinako chooses one relationship over all others and accepts that choice means losing everyone and everything else. The true ending shows that the contradiction can't be resolved within life, that only death creates space for both sides to coexist without destroying each other. Each ending is tragedy in different key. There's no version where Hinako maintains her autonomy and her relationships and her place in the community. Something has to be sacrificed. The only variable is what gets sacrificed and whether the sacrifice is conscious choice or consequence of forces beyond control. This is where the game's cultural specificity becomes important again. Western individualist cultures tend to prioritize personal autonomy as the highest value, viewing any infringement on individual choice as illegitimate regardless of justification. From that framework, Hinako's arranged marriage is simply wrong, full stop, and any ending where she escapes is good, while any ending where she's forced into marriage is bad. But the game is embedded in Japanese cultural context where the tension between individual and collective hasn't resolved definitively toward individualism. Japanese society still navigates the balance between personal desire and social obligation, still values harmony and group cohesion in ways that sometimes require individuals to subordinate their preferences to collective needs. The arranged marriage in 1960 isn't the clear-cut evil it might appear to Western audiences. It's a legitimate, if uncomfortable, social practice that served real functions and had both costs and benefits. Silent Hill F asks Japanese audiences and international audiences who can think beyond individualist frameworks to sit with the discomfort of a situation where both sides have legitimate claims. Hinako's desire for autonomy is legitimate. Her family's expectation that she'll fulfill her social role is also legitimate within their cultural framework. The collision between these legitimate claims creates tragedy that can't be resolved by simply declaring one side right and the other wrong. The game also examines what happens to relationships when individual and collective needs conflict. Shu loves Hinako, wants what's best for her, but can't escape his own embeddedness in the same social system. He knows the arranged marriage will hurt her, but he also believes it's probably the best outcome available given the constraints they're operating within. So he helps her endure rather than helping her escape, a choice that's simultaneously loving and harmful. Kotoyuki is even more complex. He's bound by supernatural compulsion to seek Hinako as bride, which means his love might not be freely chosen any more than Hinako's participation is freely chosen. But within that compulsion, he tries to be honorable, tries to follow human courtship rules, tries to give Hinako as much agency as the system allows. His failure to win her isn't moral failure. It's the inevitable result of trying to use honorable means to accomplish fundamentally non-consensual end. Junko tries to give Hinako choices and support her autonomy, but she's also embedded in family system that expects her to help guide her younger sister into appropriate social role. Her interventions are torn between sisterly concern and social expectation, and Hinako interprets them as hostile when they might be the most genuine support anyone offers her. Every relationship in the game is poisoned by the system's demands. Love isn't enough to overcome structural inequality. Good intentions don't prevent harm when you're operating within systems designed to subordinate some people's interests to others. The tragedy isn't that anyone is especially evil or selfish. The tragedy is that good people embedded in harmful systems do harmful things despite their good intentions. This is the horror that lingers after the endings conclude, not supernatural monsters or psychological guilt, but the recognition that systems are stronger than individuals, that you can be destroyed by forces no single-person controls, that everyone who hurt you might have been trying to help within the constraints they faced. There's no villain to defeat, no evil to eliminate that would make everything better. There's just systems, and the people trapped in them trying to survive and sometimes failing. The arranged marriage is the mechanism, but the theme is universal. What happens when you're asked to sacrifice your authentic self for collective stability? What happens when the answer is no, but you lack the power to make that answer stick? What happens when everyone around you is also trapped, also doing their best within impossible situations, also unable to help you because helping you would require them to sacrifice themselves? Silent Hill F doesn't offer solutions because there aren't solutions. You can't fix systems from within when you're the one being ground up by those systems. You can't expect individuals to resolve structural problems through better choices. The only options are resistance with catastrophic costs, surrender with psychological death, escape with relationship loss, or death with peace. None of these is good. The best you can hope for is choosing which terrible outcome is most tolerable. This is mature horror. Not jump scares or gore, not even psychological torture of individuals, but the horror of recognizing that sometimes there are no good options, that you can be in situations where every possible choice leads to terrible outcomes, that understanding this doesn't give you any power to change it. You just have to choose which tragedy you're going to live or die through.